which was signed with the European Union. In 2019, they withdrew from the Agreement on the Control of Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces, INF. And in 2019, they withdrew from the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, and in 2020, from the Treaty on Open Skies. In addition, they announced that they were considering conducting new nuclear tests in violation of the relevant 1963 international agreement. All the above stays intact, stays as it is by the Biden administration, despite the different rhetoric sometimes. In the Eastern Mediterranean, the Middle East, the Persian Gulf, the Balkans, the Black Sea, the Caucasus, the Central Asia, and the Pacific Ocean, and as well as in the East and South China Sea, Africa and Latin America, till the Arctic Circle, these developments are noted. Part of the conflict map is the Eastern Mediterranean region, which is a channel connecting Asia, Europe, and Africa. Wars, such as in Syria, in Libya, in addition to heavy casualties, have forced millions of people to flee their homes and to move to other countries and to Europe. The 20-year imperialist war the US, NATO, and their allies fought in Afghanistan has a great cost for the Afghan people, and it's fueling new waves of refugees. The provocative handover of the power and heavy sophisticated weapons to the Taliban by the US shows the hypocrisy and the double moral of the imperialists, who have spent around $2 trillion in 20 years, supposedly in order to combat terrorism. We are extremely concerned about the situation in the Afghan people is facing and going through, and in particular the female population of the country. The Mujahideen earlier, then Taliban, and other extremist religious forces, which were created, funded, and oriented in the 1970s for more than a decade by the US and its European allies for the purpose of overthrowing the first popular regime in the late 1980s in Afghanistan, took the control in the country for more than 10 years later on. The internationalist support of the USSR, which had brought huge progress in all social fields, was twisted and falsified by many forces and media for ideological reasons. In 2001, after having served the imperialist plans, the Taliban became then the so-called target of their previous masters. The nowadays adjustment of the foreign policy of the US and NATO in Central Asia has in mind the confrontation with Russia and China. Hundreds of thousands of people lost their lives. Millions were displaced and became refugees. Hundreds of billions of US dollars were spent for the military operations of the imperialists and for the establishment and funding of the willing puppet regimes in Kabul. The lucrative opium business mushroomed and multiplied for the last 20 years. The NATO summit last June 2021 came to review, to update, and to expedite a number of decisions from the past, as this war machine, NATO, further increases its aggression by using the new NATO Strategy 2030 and the so-called new strategic concept, which is being prepared for the next year. Old and new pretexts, such as hybrid threats, cybersecurity, and the so-called climate crisis, the energy crisis, and more, are being used to pave the way for new imperialist interventions. At the same time, within NATO, new antagonisms develop between NATO Germany, between the United States and France, between France and Germany, as well as between Turkey and France. So far, these contradictions have been settled by temporary compromises, often in a firefighting manner, but their tangle is becoming increasingly complicated, so that even bourgeois political forces and analysts are questioning the coherence of these imperialist alliances. On the background of all the above, we witnessed recently the signing of the AUKUS agreement, which is an economic, technological, political, and military agreement by which Australia is being supplied with nuclear-powered submarines. This treaty triggers the further escalation of imperialist rivalries as well as new moves on the part of China and Russia. France, which has lost a major submarine deal to Australia worth 50 billion US dollars, and the European Union, which has high-level economic ties with China, are reacting to AUKUS and pushing their own plan for a so-called strategic autonomy. It is no secret from the time of the pivot to Asia of the Obama administration that the US was planning to shift 60% of its military power towards Asia and the Pacific Ocean. The Biden administration is carrying on this line, having China as primary target in order to contain the economic and military emerging presence of China. At the same time, the US and its allies have the DPR of Korea as their target, using its powerful 7th Fleet and the hundreds of military bases in the region for military exercises and provocations. The US has signed with almost all countries of the region bilateral military agreements. They call them so-called mutual defense cooperation agreements, which include the use of military sites and port facilities and even deployment of troops or establishment of foreign military bases. Such agreement was signed also between the US and the government of Sri Lanka. Allow me here to highlight the firm positions of PASOS against this bilateral agreement and the mobilization of the Sri Lanka people against it. The AUKUS agreement will increase the arms race between all involved parties in a region where also nuclear weapons are deployed. From World Peace Council side, we want to reaffirm once again our position for the total abolition of all nuclear weapons, as we have stated historically with our Stockholm Appeal in 1950. But the AUKUS agreement comes also hand in hand with the so-called Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, known as Quad, in which the US, Japan, Australia, and India take part. Apparently, the aim is to create an alliance in order to pursue the imperialist plans in the East and South China Seas in order to counter the presence of China in the region. The US tries to line up Asian countries with its strategy, using China's claims in the region as ground and pretext. Here, it is interesting to observe that India, which is participating with China in the BRICS alliance and other regional structures, such as Shanghai Cooperation and others, is playing a key role in other alliances like the Quad, which is openly targeting China. The above-mentioned developments are of great concern, and the peace-loving forces and member organizations of the World Peace Council in the region are being called to reveal the imperialist plans, to reject them, and to mobilize awareness and actions of the peoples against them. For the World Peace Council, it is important to underline that the differences and disputes in the region have to be resolved by political and peaceful means, based on the international law and on the 1982 UN Convention of the Law of the Seas, UNCLOS. No unilateral military actions or hegemonic behavior can be accepted from any side. Neither do we believe that forces such as the USA, who are offering their so-called good services to Asian countries, are concerned about the peoples and their needs and rights. There was and there is no place on earth where the United States of America, speaking about its government, has intervened for the sake of the sovereign rights of countries and nations historically. But allow me here to refer also to the important allies of the US, which is the imperialist European Union, which is steadily militarizing itself and getting involved in many parts of the world, including the Asia and Pacific. The European Union seeks to expand its action internationally and militarily on the basis of the global strategy that adapts to the needs of European monopolies. Thus, the so-called Permanent Structured Cooperation, PESCO, was established. At the same time, the French-inspired European Intervention Initiative, composed by 9 countries, is being promoted in order to overcome the delays caused by the unanimous decision-making process in the European Union, which is not always given, so that the imperialist missions can be carried out without delays. Already today, the European Union has deployed imperialist missions on 3 continents. The EU has dozens of battle groups as rapid intervention forces composed by 4 or 5 countries each time, supposedly in order to safeguard and protect peace and stability in the world. The European Union is functioning in military terms as complementary force to NATO, and it is not by chance that 90% of the NATO members are also European Union members. There cannot be any illusion about the nature or role of the European Union, which is protecting and promoting the privileges and the profits of the European monopolies, often in competition to the ones of the United States. But when it comes to the rights of the peoples in various parts of the world, they are standing all together, hand in hand. The developments are of concern, and as World Peace Council, we are on alert. Despite the difficulties and restrictions due to the ongoing health pandemic, the World Peace Council will undertake initiatives and actions in order to rally forces and movements together against the imperialist threats and plans for a world free from imperialist wars and exploitation. We wish you, dear friends and comrades, all good health and strength in our common struggle. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Executive Secretary, World Peace Council, for providing very sharp analysis with a lot of information, which normally rare to find in the capitalist and general press. So thank you, Comrade, for your analysis. And now we are moving to our next panelist, Comrade Romina Beat Singh, Secretary, CICD Australia. Comrade, now floor is for you.
Thank you, Comrade Bimal, and thank you for Peace and Solidarity Organization Sri Lanka for inviting me to speak tonight. The introductory was quite good, so it may be a bit repetition of what we heard in the slides. So the recent announcement of trilateral security a partnership between Australia, the United States and the UK, known as AUKUS, has implications for regional security in the Indo-Pacific. The 3 allies said they would spend the next 18 months sorting out the details of a security collaboration that President Biden was so celebrative and called it as historic. Now, over a month into the timetable, the partners are quite quietly coming to grip with the proposal's enormous complications. Australia has chosen to forego any constructive relationship with China and to escalate tensions by engaging with the military control of the USA. This choice will create regional political and economic instability. It also reveals a complete failure of strategic thinking about communicating China's world view in peaceful and non-militarized world. According to the creators of this agreement, it is a pact to counter China's influence in the Indo-Pacific region. Australia will enter into an undefined arrangement with the USA and the United Kingdom for regional security, they call it. The pact binds Australia conclusively to the United States and Great Britain for generations. Many Indo-Pacific nations have only recently emerged from a long period of oppressive European imperialism. Surely tensions will increase, as already suggested by the Indonesian and Malaysian responses to AUKUS. Sending war-fighting subs to a potential conflict in the Indo-Pacific region is yet another breach of international law by the three Anglo allies. It is time to stand up and oppose the reckless and immoral move by these countries. China is correct when it said that AUKUS betrays a Cold War mentality in international relations. This agreement has set Australia on a path to potentially obtain nuclear-powered submarines, which in total could cost Australia between $120 to $180 billion. The United States and now Australia states that the China problem has to be confronted militarily and isolated. Such a policy is not a strategy for peace. Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison has laid out an ambitious vision, saying that at least 8 nuclear propelled submarines using American or British technology will be built and enter the waters starting in the late 2030s. That is in 20 years' time. Australian Strategic Policy Institute, ASPI, a think tank directly funded by Corporate Weapons Incorporation, claims that AUKUS represents the most important pivot point in Australia's strategic policy since the Second World War. They argue that Australia now understands it must make the uncomfortable choice it has avoided for so long and choose between China, its largest trading partner, or the United States, with which it has an alliance. AUKUS, therefore, has firmly placed Australia's choice on the side of the United States, which that is a good reason for peace movement to be very worried about. International opposition to AUKUS, peace and common security advocates from around the world oppose Quad, Japan, India, US, Australia, and AUKUS, Australia, UK, US, militarism, and urge common security collaborations to address experimental nuclear, climate, and pandemic threats. Meetings on the eve of the Quad Alliance Summit, peace, justice, and common security advocates from the Quad and AUKUS member countries, and Australia, Philippines, Vietnam, Japan, South Korea, India, Britain, Germany, and the US met to analyze and build opposition to the dangerous and increased militarism of the Quad and AUKUS alliances. Opposing the AUKUS, Australian peace organizations are demanding that Australia not become a base for the US military, that Australian sovereignty not to be surrendered to the US. The transfer of highly enriched uranium and related technologies to Australia violates the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and encourages nuclear weapons proliferation. It provides Australia with resources needed to become a nuclear power, and significant political and military figures in India, South Korea, and Japan ask why they haven't been why they have been denied these capabilities by the United States. The AUKUS alliance increases pressure on ASEAN and other regional nations to choose sides in a way that compromises their independence. Australia's island neighbours will not welcome further nuclearization of the region, even as they face current security challenges, including the climate emergency and the COVID-19 pandemic. AUKUS could open the door for other nuclear-armed countries to make similar offers. The China-Pakistan nuclear collaboration could take such a turn. This deal makes no strategic sense for Australia. The timescale reinforces the entire air of unreality about equipment. Equipping these submarines, only a couple of which may be operationally available at any one time. Some commentators suggest Australia must buy some submarines to help US to counter the Chinese threat to Taiwan. But no one knows that this will happen. No one knows, that this will happen to China or the US in the radically uncertain future. By 2060, China may be the dominant country in the Asia. No credible threat has been presented to justify this agreement, and no specific case has been presented to justify the need for nuclear submarines. As has already been seen, the US could be ruled by a madman eager to use nuclear weapons. However, whether the US is led by Biden or Trump, it has shown it is willing to go to war or use nuclear weapons to support its political and strategic control. That's what they're interested in control. The chances that Australia having nuclear submarines means that it would involve itself in a war over Taiwan in 2060, which is a remote possibility. It does not constitute a rational basis for deciding now to commit more than $100 billion to these weapons and missiles platform. The US has 68 nuclear submarines. The prospect of Australia getting 8 by 2060 is not a game changer for serious American strategies. Australia does not have the technical infrastructure or skilled sailors to operate or maintain these subs. The cost to establish these capacities is extremely expensive, and still will only provide a weapon under the control of the US. By far, the most important change occurred when Australia agreed to host several joint facilities that produce real-time intelligence fed directly into the US warfighting machine from Pine Gap outside Alice Springs, Shoal Bay near Darwin, and Geraldton and Northwest Cape in Western Australia. So they are the strategic importance for the United States, and they've been using them for years. Among other capabilities, these facilities intercept a huge range of electronic signals from China, as well as detecting data on heat emissions from missiles, jet engines, and ground explosions. So will China and Russia believe Biden when he pledges that the administration will pursue diplomacy rather than exercise military force to solve global crisis? In practical terms, what happens, what happened was Australia's political elite acted like a client state and simply rubber-stamped UK foreign policy. No hard questions were asked, and Australia distorted into the slaughterhouse of World War I. In 1941, Australia turned to the US. History has now repeated itself. Since World War II, Australia has followed US to every war ever since been involved with the US. As the US has entered a period of economic and military decline, China continues to rise. It is now a crucial for Australia trade partner. Now we have AUKUS and the plan to encircle the Chinese in the South and East China Seas. The US-led Quad Alliance, which include India, Japan, and Australia, is another strategy to encircle China. Opposing the AUKUS alliance, Australian peace organizations are demanding that Australia reject the nuclear submarines and the US military buildup on Australian soil. A number of meetings amongst peace movement nationally and internationally have taken place so far. There is a monthly Zoom meeting and of all interested groups exchanging ideas of putting together some campaigns to oppose AUKUS. On 31st of October, a protest took place in Perth. A UK Astute class nuclear submarine was visiting Perth, the first visit of its kind since the AUKUS announcement, a show of what's to come. Peace activists very quickly went down and called for an end to AUKUS, demanding that the government signs and ratifies the nuclear ban treaty and confirm there will be no nuclear power in Australia. National AUKUS coalition movement has been set up and there will be a meeting of this coalition on the 7th of November, this coming Sunday. This is the initial meeting to determine support for the formation of national coalition movement and to discuss proposals for nationwide activities on the weekend of 10th and to 12th of December. So there will be a national campaign on those 2 days. So the same as other peace organization, we say no to military coalition, no to Quad, no to AUKUS, no to war, yes to peace. Thank you, comrades.
Thank you, Comrade Romina. You explained about your plans and your protests and your struggles to defeat and to explain the evil nature of these military pacts. And we wish all the success, and we would ask our Sri Lankan community and other communities who are living in Australia to join with your cause for peace. Thank you, Comrade. Now, then let's move to Comrade Harchan Singh, Deputy General Secretary of All India Peace and Solidarity Organization, officer. Dear Comrade Harchan, now floor is open for you.
Thank you.